lot of the work we do is creating new products and experiences, whether they be apps or websites or retail experiences that incorporate really innovative technologies. But we realized as we were talking about emotion AI that there has not yet been a public conversation around ethics, around privacy, around the useful or dangerous deployment of this technology, which we're about to put into the hands of marketers who frankly haven't been trained to understand what it's good at, what it's bad at, and what the dangers are. So we wanted to bring to D&AD an experience where creatives could have that firsthand, actually have the experience of being measured, of watching others, and contemplate that before we bake these technologies into all of our apps, into our retail environments, to have that experience of developing their own views on what would and wouldn't be appropriate deployments of that experience.
And so when we talk about emotional AI, what we mean is things like cameras that can detect, maybe micro movements in our faces, what we might be expressing that we don't know we're expressing, that kind of thing,
as well as voice or skin sensors, which determine the level of emotional engagement with subject matter.
As an anthropologist, as a digital ethnographer, I follow the conversations that are being had online, where even the DARPA robots, people react very viscerally to the advancements in technology that they see as threatening, or sometimes they see as amusing, or sometimes they're sympathetic towards them. So there's a whole range of responses, and as an anthropologist, that's what I'm paying attention to.
I think, from me, it's, I suppose, like what's interesting is the convergence of technology, data, and creativity coming together. Because I think now we've got to start asking ourselves, how do we design for emotional AI UI? How do we design for interfaces that might be able to read you and change based on your emotion? How many people have spoken to a bank? I did last night and got pissed off. And you want to be able to sort of design future products, future interfaces that be able to adapt visually, narrative-wise to AI and how it's come on board. And I think it's a really exciting new territory.
What are the sort of tension points or the concerns that you see the general public seem to have around AI?
Yeah, so obviously in the Western Anglophone sphere, we're very heavily influenced by the more dystopic stories, and they have to be dystopic for there to be stories. Lots of people think, the tendency toward the dystopic, it says something very inherent about us, but I think a lot of the time it just says something inherent about story structure, that you can't have a nice utopian story, everyone gets bored. So that's necessary, and there's obviously dystopic stories in other parts of the world that people don't necessarily pay as much attention to here. So it's also very useful to think about the narratives that exist around the world that we kind of don't notice so much. So so paying attention to where cultural differences incline people to think of AI more benevolently, or they assume that it will be detrimental to humanity's future or not.
I mean, part of what we're doing is we're showing people videos which themselves are about different technological advances and applications. So people are responding first to those use cases, then they're responding to their emotions being actually measured and observed. So also one of our researchers was talking about a person who saw the contempt line. Contempt is one of the emotions which is monitored, and the contempt spiked. And that made her angry because it's there's this feedback loop that emerges. And I think that's actually exactly the kind of conversation we want to have, which is that sometimes you don't think about how your emotions manifest outwardly. Whether you're a sports fan and when your team scores, you're like, goal! And that actually to a machine appears very aggressive, right? That if you don't have the context of sports, it appears to be this outward display of rage. And so I think just understanding how important context has been one of the key learnings and observations downstairs. And unless you've already been in this space and you understand how the science works, as a designer or strategist, that's really important context to have.
And humans, we react to technology all the time, whatever it is. And I think the interesting thing is we're only just starting to have those conversations. Car manufacturers are now making AI built in so that it can understand whether you're falling asleep or whatever. And if that saves a life out there of a young life, that's fucking great. But it's really about context. And I think this is new frontier, right? Nobody knows what the fuck we're doing. So it's really interesting.
It's about context and also consent. And as you begin to explore this area, one of the most fascinating things that emerges is that informed consent by definition means someone must be informed. And there's such a steep learning curve on understanding that it's not just that there's a video camera watching you, it's that that video feed is being enriched, it's being appended, there's AI processing that into identity to recognize you, or into emotions. And so I think that part of this, the difficulty of this moment is even in covering these stories or trying to put a sign on a door indicating what's going to happen when you step in and these cameras are observing you, is we have this very limited window to actually engage and educate people so that that consent is informed. Otherwise, you're not truly getting consent because people don't understand the implications of being recognized or analyzed by these tools.
These are the questions anthropologists have had to ask themselves already, that we go into spaces and we observe people, and at what point do we tell our observees, our participants, that we are watching them, and do we continuously remind them as well? Do I go around wearing a badge, say, hi, I'm an anthropologist? And perhaps, I mean, that's worth drawing out as well, that there's a lot of debate about the ethics of AI, and as though this is an entirely new field, where actually the ethical questions, I think, have existed continuously for centuries. It's just that AI, I think, gives us a moment of disruption and disjoint to actually start reflecting more on what we want society to look like and what we want humans to do and to be able to do, and where those limitations lie. So it's definitely a good point for conversations. It's just unfortunate that it seems in some cases, not all cases, the technology is now rushing so far ahead of where people can keep up with it. So I know Congress are talking about it, the moratorium suggestion. Is that going to be enough to actually slow down that process around the world?
I think we can safely expect it will be years before there is, consistent regulation of any kind on these types of technologies, except as they're kind of derivative of PII or personal data storage in general. So I think what we have to anticipate is that things like the political influence scandals, we may look back on those techniques as being kind of quaint, in terms of the data applications and the way that they were implemented then, compared to what is becoming quite possible and even easy now with a very, very small investment in technology. That's probably the thing which concerns me the most about misuse, either in a brand or political context, is just that it's so ridiculously easy once you've got a camera and cloud-based services to begin experimenting. And I think just as we look at people experimenting with CRISPR for genetic engineering, people looking at other spaces which are highly controversial, this is just an extension of that same kind of democratization of technology for good or for dangerous purposes.
Just picking on emotional AI, right? I think it's really interesting now. There's products out there that are glass technology for autistic people to be able to read emotions, right? Because obviously if your autistic spectrum, sometimes reading people's emotions is hard, but now it can sort of signal to them to go, oh, that person's happy, therefore I need to react this way. That person's sad, I need to react that way. So there's a huge community of untapped people that have been disadvantaged in this world because of learning difficulties or acceptance, and I think that's really great that technology is now fulfilling part of that.
PTSD is another very common kind of a positive association of people who are traumatized, may have trouble opening up to a human counselor, but who are okay talking to a machine.
We had a wonderful interview with a woman from a lab where they use small robots to interact with autistic children, and again, they find that useful because they do not have the vast array of facial expressions. So actually calming down the emotional noise is really helpful. And further, they found they actually then find it easier to interact with humans afterwards. So that those sorts of beneficial examples are very useful.
Manipulation can take many forms, and the same tools and underlying science that says that, hey, maybe if we made this person more confident, they'd be more likely to buy more stuff, could equally be flipped to say, maybe if we undermine your confidence, if we make you feel vulnerable or uncertain or desperate, you'd pay more for something. And so you start understanding that these can start with very subtle cues, that if I sense impatience, I might act on impatience in a brand context in several different ways. In the same way that behavioral economics, you look at scarcity or urgency as being levers in an e-commerce setting. Add emotion as a layer to that, and it is very troubling, this notion that I could be preyed upon in that consumer context. I think we have to make sure that when our clients are desperate to be, they want to be first to market or first in category or meet this quarter's revenue goals, those are the times when we're more likely to race ahead without proper safeguards and embrace techniques like that that could have unforeseen or, God forbid, intended consequences which prey upon vulnerable users.
What I worry about is a sort of too simplistic reliance on systems that are not sophisticated as they appear to be. And we get a sort of modern phrenology where we've already seen there's facial recognition software being used to like characterize people as these people are gay, these people are not gay. And there is an element of that in some of the discussions around facial recognition, and we should be very cautious about feeling that people can fit into neat categories. And actually humans are much, much messier than that.
The danger we run is in bubbles. Right, it's surrounding yourself with people who are from the same socioeconomic class, race, cultural associations, and especially in this field of AI, the same thing happens with disciplines. If you surround yourself only with other visual creatives, you don't really get the full spectrum of the type of team it takes to deploy these experiences. So I would say make friends who are attorneys, make friends who are technologists, make friends who are writers, and try to create like a diverse interdisciplinary team that can explore all the dimensions of what you want to create, because we've kind of transcended this moment where a single creative can create a whole experience, right? All these really compelling interactions require a series of disciplines, and so there should be a part of us that is not just a generalist, but also seeks out other specialists to partner with.
Yeah. I think creative people and creative thinkers are a powerful force for good, and I think it's down to us to embrace this, use it in a way that's good and cool, and I think that people-powered AI version of how it comes out with marketers or design or whatever becomes really cool.